So our presenters today are Dr. Sarah Todd. She's the academic lead for YouthREX in the Eastern Hub and a co-author on the report that we just launched. She's an associate professor in the School of Social Work at Carleton. She's joined by Jackie Stol, who is a YouthREX research assistant, MSW student at Carleton, and the lead author on the report that we just launched. We're also joined by Susan Burhoe, who is the program coordinator for the Center for Initiatives in Education at Carleton, and we consulted with their program in the writing of our report. And Natalie Lowry, who's a recent graduate of this program, she'll be sharing her experiences as well. So first, before we get started with the presentations, I'd like to ask all the participants in the webinar to fill out this poll. We're wondering if you're working in supporting the educational outcomes for youth, what supports you offer. So if you could just take a minute to fill that out, you can fill out as many as apply to your work. I love that 100% offer moral support. Informational support is very high. Academic support. Moral support and informational support is very high. That's interesting. The numbers are changing. We'll close it now. But right now, the final numbers are informational support and moral support are the most frequently offered supports to young people seeking post-secondary access, followed by academic support and then financial support and other. I'd be very curious to hear what are the other kinds of support. These are the main ones identified in the literature. But under the other category, I'd love to hear at the end what are those other supports that you have identified that young people need. Okay, at this point, we'll close the poll and share the results. And we'll move on to learning more about bridging programs and context, and we'll turn it over to our academic lead, Dr. Sarah Todd at Carleton in the School of Social Work in Ottawa.
Hi, everybody. So I thought I'd begin by telling a little bit about why we decided to do this report. And it grew out of, I've worked for a number of years in a community in Ottawa that struggles a lot with poverty and various other sort of social and economic pressures. And I sit on a group that includes service providers in the community and community members. And a couple of years ago, on that group, they decided that what they really wanted to spend time on that year was how to connect community members with the university and how they could try to encourage more of their members to go to post-secondary education, and in particular, the local universities in Ottawa. And this was something that, because I teach in a school of social work, I thought was really important because we really need people who grow up in communities dealing with these kinds of pressures to then become social workers so that they can challenge and change the profession and also so they can make differences back in the communities that they came from. At the same time, these turned out to be hard questions to answer, in part because at our university, our bridging program was being redesigned, but also when we started to talk about the numbers in terms of the expense of going to higher education and the loans and bursary programs that were available, people around the table started to feel like this maybe wasn't a possibility. So we began to look at different ways where we could do sort of more informal bridging. So we had some university professors go out to do lectures in the community, and with YouthREX we also offered Noise, which is a program to involve young people in learning about research and evaluation where they come to the university. We started to do that too in the community, but we wanted to find out more about bridging programs and particularly what was offered at Carleton, and so that was kind of what started this research to practice paper. So I'm going to just go over some of the key concepts. For the purposes of this webinar, we're going to be talking about bridging programs as an alternative way for students to move to post-secondary education by accessing support services that help them gain the skills and prerequisites to enroll. The next concept we're probably going to use quite a bit is the idea about access. And when we use this term, we're speaking about the process of enrolling in post-secondary education. But we know that just getting access and enrolling in post-secondary education isn't the whole deal. So we also are going to be talking about persistence. And with that, we're talking about how people get from entering into post-secondary education and sustain in their programs and successfully graduate. So we know that in order to get to that end point, it's not just about getting people into higher education, but what we do with them while they're here to help it be a really good experience and to help them be successful. And the last key concept that we're going to be talking about is the notion of pathways. And so what we're sort of trying to explore here are that at different points in people's lives, there are different things that go into their decisions about whether to go into higher education or not, and that affect their ability to do so. So we are often with pathways talking about fluid movement between higher education, work, unemployment, training programs, and just a sort of continual movement back and forth over people's lives. Some of the things we know, we know that high school diplomas are not enough to get good jobs. We know that post-secondary education can really improve people's jobs prospects, their earning power, and their contribution to society. While it isn't a guarantee of anything, we do know that when people engage in higher education, they get more skills and confidence and are able to contribute in a whole range of ways that are important to people's local communities, that are important to their lives and their families, and to society in general. We also know that the barriers to higher education are really multiple and complex. They exist at the structural level, so in the way we organize our society. So at this level, we're talking specifically about issues of racism and sexism, heterosexism, and various economic inequalities that exist in our society. There are also institutional barriers. So we know that the cost of higher education, we know that the accessibility of counselors and support to help people get into higher education, and the culture itself can sometimes be a barrier. And then there are also personal barriers, and these are affected and shaped by the structural barriers in our society and often start really early on in a person's childhood and sort of build up as they grow older to make university inaccessible. So this includes sort of inter-family dynamics about how much parents encourage students to see education as important, to see their abilities and capacities in education as valuable, and to sort of see engagement in education as something the whole family and community supports. The last thing we know is that bridging programs play a really important role in reducing the barriers to post-secondary education. So in a few minutes, my colleague Jackie will talk about some of the research that's being done and exactly what we know about the role that bridging programs play. But before we do this, I just want to talk for a couple minutes about the provincial context of bridging programs in Ontario. The Ontario government has said that this is important to them and have invested money to improve access to post-secondary education. So that's good in terms of a sort of political and policy environment for supporting these kinds of programs. The other thing we know is that as far as the province goes, we do a pretty good job in terms of getting secondary school students to enroll in college and university. So we see 80% of them enrolling and 70% of them graduating. from university or college. Half of those go to university and the other half to go to college or apprenticeship programs or private training programs. So there's a really big range of programs that people get involved in. Ontario also has one of the highest university attendance rates in Canada and a strong culture of research and development. So we know that there's an infrastructure there that if we could break down some of the barriers and really get actively involved, there are spaces that could really enrich people's lives. So we have the resources in the province. We just need to get a strategy in place to have more people take advantage of that. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jackie, my colleague, who will talk more about the research.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jackie, as they said. So now we're going to talk about the fun stuff, the evidence and research. So just before I get into what the findings and recommendations were, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the literature review process and how we came to these findings. So while the literature review wasn't exactly comprehensive, we sought to draw on a variety of resources. So these included academic and peer-reviewed journals and also books and gray literature. So we looked at policy documents, reports, and case examples. So we were trying to find those that kind of used mixed methods, so both qualitative and quantitative methods. And also that included the perspectives of youth themselves and service providers, which are really, really important for building these types of programs. On top of that, we also consulted with YouthREX staff for resources and knowledge, and also 4 coordinators from Carleton University's Enriched Support Program and their Aboriginal Enriched Support Program that we're going to hear about a little later on. So as Sarah mentioned, the context of Ontario is looking good in comparison to both national and international rates. But unfortunately, a variety of interrelated and complex barriers and factors have led to certain groups of students being underrepresented in PSC institutions. So according to the literature, you can see on this slide that those from a low-income family being the first person in a family to attend PSC, first generation. So just from now on, when I say PSC, it's referring to post-secondary education. Being Aboriginal, rural, or from the north, having dependents, having disabilities, or being a young person in or leaving government care, also called Crown Ward. So other factors include the race and gender of the individual, which affects the participation rate. So I'm not really going to get into many of the differences in those rates. They're outlined more in detail in the report because we want to kind of focus more on practice implications in this presentation. One of the big things to recognize when looking at these different identities and characteristics is that they really overlap. So obviously one person can have many different identities and experiences that affect their participation in education. So that not only affects the research when you're looking at trying to build effective and targeted programs according to what the rates are, but it really complicates trying to tease that out and understand more about the data and how to develop those programs. Luckily, though, there is growing research that links barriers and contextual factors to the experiences of these groups of students. So that can kind of help us build more effective programs. So before we get into some of those factors and what they mean, I kind of wanted to broaden it a little bit to the bigger picture. So Sarah did talk about what is the rationale and the need for addressing bridging programs and equity in PSC. As we know, participating in the economy, which bridging programs help students bridge into, is a key factor in being able to both enjoy and contribute to a healthy and sustainable community. If we look at the research, many different factors are positively associated with education, including civic engagement, overall health, commitment to lifelong learning, and life satisfaction. So in addition, when we think about kind of our current globalized context, it's clear that issues are becoming even more complex at local and international levels. So it's really important that communities themselves can gain skills and access opportunities to be able to make changes in their communities and make changes at the international level. And also PSC institutions definitely benefit from increasing diversity of both students and teachers. In essence, this means that the more diverse the institutions, the more representative they are. So these are just some of the points. And just to briefly put this in there, because I just actually came out of a class on Aboriginal social policy, and the discussion was completely in line with this. We were talking about how we can start decolonizing knowledge in our institutions, and I just wanted to bring that up a little bit because I think it's very important for when we think about how to bring diversity and how to address some of the systemic oppression and factors that are affecting equity in institutions. Okay, so now getting into some of those barriers and factors. So one of the common misconceptions in understanding the needs of students and in responding to those needs is the idea that finance-based programs and incentives are the main opportunity to break down barriers. But what we now know through a lot of research building up is that financial barriers, which is one of the most common government responses, doesn't completely address the equity gap. So in the literature, there are kind of a few overarching factors that have been defined that point to the different ways we can build opportunities off of in order to increase participation. So these include financial factors, so lack of funds, students wanting to avoid debt in a loan-based student aid system, students who are sensitive to increases, students and families who are sensitive to increases in the cost of attending post-secondary education. There's also informational, so lack of financial and post-secondary pathway information, which many of you seem to be addressing, and motivational, so the lack of confidence, absence of parental engagement and encouragement by both institutions and within families themselves, and the lack of adequate preparation for PSE in primary or secondary school environments. That's just the next bullet point. Yay. So other factors have also been grouped into academic, geographical, and institutional barriers. So one of the key resources that was found in literature review was published in 2011, and it was by the College Student Alliance, the Ontario Student Trustees Association, and the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance. And what they did was they drew from a variety of sources, so student and youth perspectives and the literature, peer-reviewed journals, and they created a holistic strategy that addresses equal access to higher education. So in the report, they look at both early intervention, the processes and transitions to get to access. They look at access, and they also look beyond access to a long-term approach. So it's a really key resource that I think is very useful. And this table was drawn from that resource. It uses existing research to show the relationship between barriers to PSE participation and the characteristics of potential students, which are listed vertically. I forgot which one. So just as an example, if you look at the identifying factor of being a first-generation student, research shows that they can experience financial, informational, motivational, institutional barriers. However, a relationship between first-generation students and geographic barriers hasn't been found. And also for academic barriers, there's not a clear relationship. So it's through understanding these kind of complex factors more, understanding that each individual's experience is unique, can really help us in developing more effective programs. So in this next slide, we're talking about supporting nonlinear pathways. This diagram is actually split onto two slides, but I'll just talk about it briefly and then go into it. So another common misconception is the expectation that students take a linear pathway through education. So they're expected to graduate from high school, enter a PhD degree, and then find a career linked to that degree. But it's pretty clear now that youth experiences and recent reports show that it's definitely not a linear pathway. Bridging programs are one part of the alternative pathways that students take to get into PhD. So this diagram was taken from a report called YouthREX, and on the next slide there's a link to That report, if you want to look at it more closely, because it's kind of hard to see. So just going to the next slide. Yeah, the bridging programs are actually placed at the top left-hand corner at the point of access. So as Sarah mentioned, we're talking about the transition, and the transition is not necessarily from secondary school to a PSC, a post-secondary institution. It can be between work and college and university, community agencies, and PSC institutions, or many other pathways. So their role is to really help students get the skills and requirements to access credit courses toward the completion of a degree. So now I just want to talk a little bit about some of the core features, I guess, or core findings, particularly about bridging programs and their outcomes. So the research is actually not comprehensive about the outcomes of bridging programs, but there is a lot of research showing promising program outcomes, mostly from case studies and models, but those kind of offer a lot of potential for improving practice and also for students to benefit from. So first off, bridging programs are most often hosted by PSC institutions and happen through collaboration between those PSC institutions, secondary schools, employment services, and community organizations as well. The next feature is that they really vary in their structure, and they're adapted to the local context. And they also work with PSC institutions, policies, and processes, so that's one of the reasons why they're so different in their structure. So for example, the University of Toronto has a transitional year program, and it's a full-time access program for those who don't yet have formal qualifications to enter PSC. So the programs provide a variety of support services that seek to be holistic. So they could help students with practical supports like transportation, and that has actually been shown to improve outcomes in participation in PSC. Have especially cited that they've gained skills in academic and course-specific content, and that their learning experience is improved when there are a supportive environment, particularly through peers and also through counselors who help them bridge into university life in general. Some of the successful programs that we found in the literature, they focus on skill development, course content support, support in transitioning to schools, support in navigating the post-secondary school system. So for example, finding specific resources and different services that meet their needs, and also in career and academic planning. So models also vary in their use of tutors, instructors, mentors, advisors, counselors, and coaches. There's a lot of different ways that they can be structured, but I think it'll be more clear when we talk about Carleton's program later. The other programs also target specific populations or community needs. And one great example is Carleton's Aboriginal Enriched Support Program, which Susan will also talk about in a bit. Okay, so one of my last slides is about practice implications. So I'm going to focus on three practice implications, but we really wanted this part to be us about how we can collaborate better between youth workers, communities, and institutions in order to break down some of those barriers and increase equity. So again, I wanted to bring up the holistic and long-term strategy that I talked about earlier. So while we talk about right now access and the point of transition to get into PSC, I wanted to just acknowledge the importance of early intervention and education in elementary school and secondary school. So the first practice implication is that youth PSC outcomes improve when bridging programs are adapted to local context, institutional policies, and workforce requirements, a lot of long words, and when they offer contextualized instruction, career development, and transition services. So contextualized instruction means that it's integrating basic reading, math, and language skills with what is actually out there in the industry or in actual occupation. Career and transition services are a part of that holistic approach we talked about earlier. So for example, the role of a transition coordinator has actually been shown to improve outcomes in the literature, in particular in their ability to help students access resources, knowledge, and support systems. So the next one is what we've seen in the last slide, is that outcomes improve when they access both holistic strategies and support services, and when the services are ongoing and offer counseling that looks at the range of financial and non-financial needs. And lastly, youth outcomes improve when bridging programs recognize and respond to the diversity of students' needs and experiences. So this can happen in both the learning curriculum, the classroom environment, and especially in the overall institution, which is probably a lot harder. So an example that can be brought up is related to the mainstream and Eurocentric culture of PSC institutions, and that has been shown in the literature to cause conflicts for students entering who have different cultural or social beliefs and who might feel that they need to adapt to this type of mainstream culture. But it's important that programs can be more relevant for students and bring in their life experiences, build on their strengths and skills, and engage in using a more critical lens that can be generalized across an academic institution. So just reflecting on it, I also thought this would be important and have a big impact on working between communities and institutions and outreach and engagement when we're thinking about particular circumstances like remote or rural communities or circumstances in Aboriginal reserves and how different policies and processes affect their experience with PSC. So lastly, just to bring, before we go to the programs and resources, an important point for improving access is around the narrative in communicating about PSC institutions or about bridging programs. So it's pretty clear in the literature that, especially from student voices, that there's a lot of stigmatizing language around being seen as a failure or having deficits in terms of I didn't get the right credits in order to access, so it's the individual's fault. So I think that has a lot of important implications for when we're trying to change this narrative and talk more about equity and equal participation. And that's one thing that came up in the literature, both within the learning curriculum and also in communicating in the broader community. So lastly, I just wanted to share some useful resources about programs that were found in the literature. The first one is the Post-Secondary as Possible initiative that came out of the Council of Educators of Toronto. So they really provide a really good review, not review, but they provide lists and descriptions and links to access programs and outreach programs under these categories. While they don't label them as bridging programs, a lot of them have that bridging function. So you can visit their programs through the link on this webpage. So that's it for me. I'm now going to pass it over to my colleague, Susan Burhoe. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan Burhoe. I work with the Center for Initiatives in Education at Carleton University, and I work with a couple of Pathways programs that we run here, the Enriched Support Program and the Aboriginal Enriched Support Program. So what these Pathways programs are really are programs designed for students who maybe didn't follow that linear pathway that Jacqueline talked about earlier, and who might not meet the traditional requirements to go directly into a degree program at university. What the program offers really is an opportunity. So it's a chance for students to start first-year courses with structured academic and social support built in. You can move to the next slide there, make some of those points. Thank you. Successful completion of our program earns admission to a degree program here at Carleton. And what we find is that students coming into our program really have a variety of experiences that maybe interfered with them meeting those paper requirements of, a 70-some% average to go directly into a degree. So they have such a range of experiences. Some of, they come in with learning disabilities or physical disabilities, or maybe have experienced mental health issues in high school, and that interfered with the traditional sort of completion pathway. Maybe they had family disruptions or substance abuse issues, maybe a more general lack of engagement or motivation, or negative experiences in the high school environment that led to them having a more difficult time achieving those grade point averages that they needed, or even all the credits that they required. Students coming into our program might have lower grade point averages. They might have a combination of college stream courses and university stream courses because they weren't sure about what pathway they wanted when they were at that decision point in high school where you have to choose a stream. And often they've had negative experiences sometimes in the educational setting where they've been told, you're not university material. This pathway is not for you. And I think often the performance that students demonstrate in high school has a lot to do with their personal circumstances and the things that are going on in their life, and not always to do with whatever the skills might be that are required to succeed, at the level that universities want to see. So when students come into our program, they're given the opportunity to take the same first-year courses that other students are enrolled in. We're conscious to try and get them as involved in the Carleton community as we can. They have that chance to take those first-year courses graded according to the same standards as other students, participate in all those forms of campus life. But we're not just throwing them in the deep end on their own. We're offering them a set of supports that are designed to help them come into university and not be afraid of what's there, to ease that journey that you have to take through OSAP, through application, through registration, deciding what courses to take, as well as to help them academically succeed in the courses that they take when they're here. Our Enriched Support Program also has a stream specifically for Aboriginal students called the Aboriginal Enriched Support Program. And this program was really designed to address issues of access to higher education for Aboriginal peoples. It has all the same supports that I'll describe in our Enriched Support Program, but it also has some unique features. And part of the reason for that is that AESP is really designed to create a safe space for Aboriginal students coming into what is often a Western colonial space. The ways that we do that are through things like a first-year seminar course taught by an Aboriginal instructor who works to incorporate traditional knowledge as well as academic knowledge. He also brings in traditional ceremony and experiences, and offers culturally specific support. A few ways that we try and do that are through connecting students with Aboriginal peer mentors. So these are students who completed the program successfully the year before and are there to work with students in the seminar to help them navigate that transition period of coming into first year of university, and really share their experiences as students who've been there, who've been successful, who've done this and completed it successfully. We offer help with the application and funding process, support with connecting to community resources such as childcare, Aboriginal service providers in the community. We also offer an orientation week to help students adapt to the campus in general, connect with some of the services that are here. We have visitors from elders, a traditional healing circle that's part of that week. And really, the goal is to ease students into that university setting and help them to start building the connections that are going to see them through first year, because the connections to those resource providers on campus are one aspect of that, but really also the community that they build with one another the supports that they offer to each other as a cohort are also such a core part of the success that they're going to experience going forward. So what does the program offer? Well, it offers pathways into degrees in arts and social sciences, into business, into engineering and science. The business, engineering, and science streams are smaller streams within the program, and they do have specific prerequisite subject requirements. The arts and social science stream does not. I'll talk a bit about what the application, what we look for in the application process in a moment. But the program itself, you can move to the next slide, that was fine. The program itself has students come in and they do 3 first-year credit courses and 2 non-credit workshops. So that puts them into 5 things in their first year, which is what a typical first-year student might be taking, although a student in a first year of university might be taking 5 credit courses. Our program, students come in, they take 5 courses, but it's a combination of the credit and the non-credit. Despite that, OSAP still recognizes it as a full-time program, so students who are applying to our program can get full-time funding for the program itself, and it is a full-time program. So the things that students take, they enroll in 1 first-year seminar, and that's the one course that's taught by faculty in-house. So that's taught by instructors in the program, and what the seminar aims to do is provide them with 1 class in their first year that's a smaller class, where they really get a chance to kind of build a sense of community. They get the opportunity to learn some academic skills at the same time that they're learning whatever the content of the course is. So the seminar instructor aims to build in an introduction to how academic reading works, academic research, academic writing, at the same time that they're teaching that content. And the seminar is supported by peer mentors who attend it. And that mentor program also offers a leadership opportunity for the students coming in, because those who successfully complete the program can apply to become student mentors the following year for the new cohort coming in. In addition to the seminar, they choose a couple of first-year courses from the list of first-year courses offered here at the university, so things like Intro to Psychology or Social Work or Chemistry or Economics, just depending on what their goal is in terms of getting into a degree. So those first-year courses are supported by workshops offered by our department, and they're led by upper-year students who teach weekly review sessions. So what they're there to do really is, teach is probably the wrong word, facilitate is really what they're there to do, to facilitate students' learning by giving them an opportunity to learn some academic skills, and instead of learning those skills and then going away and trying to apply them to the content that they're learning, they're going to show them a set of academic skills and have the students apply it to the material that they need to know that week for that course. So it really gives students an opportunity to practice their knowledge in a friendly, low-stakes environment where making mistakes is part of the course and part of what is expected, and we're teaching them to master content by reviewing it in a variety of ways. The support offered in those workshops is also scaffolded, so at the beginning of the year, it's really much more directed by that peer facilitator, and toward the end of the year, that peer facilitator is turning things over more and more to the students in the workshop and having them design it and lead the activities. So the idea is to build those students' confidence and skills throughout the year, so that by the end of the year, when they're going into their degree program, they have a degree of confidence in their own ability to review and learn course content. Additional supports include student advising, where students meet with advisors like myself for program information, registration, support, really help in navigating the rules and regulations of this giant bureaucracy that is first-year university, and as well as doing some academic and career planning, so thinking about the long term and how do they get where they want to be. And finally, the other aspect of our program support is one-on-one support. So this is academic advantage coaching, which is really one-on-one kind of tutors available to help students with essay writing, with dealing with procrastination successfully, time management, and maybe subject-specific support like math or chemistry as well. Okay, you can move to the next slide now. That's great. So what we find in terms of success, so much of the success depends on the student's engagement, which is no surprise probably to any of you. If the students successfully complete our program with at least a C+ average, they're guaranteed admission to some program at Carleton. There'll be some programs that have higher grade point average requirements. The credits that they've taken transfer to their degree because they're the same first-year courses other students are taking. And in terms of the success rate, so if we look at students with good attendance, that's students who have 70% attendance or higher, not perfect, but like good. 80 to 90% of those students earn admission to a degree program at the end of their ESP year, or AESP year. Students with poor attendance, only 40-some% of them are earning admission to a degree program at the end of their year in our program. In total, out of the students that we admit, 60 to 70% of them earn admission to a degree at the end of the year. And as I say, so much depends on that student's engagement during their year with us. Okay, move on to the next. Applications. So how do we decide who comes into the program? Because we're not just looking at a high school average. Instead, we ask students to really share with us their story. So we ask for a written application that has an application essay where they talk about their experience. We ask for letters of reference for people who've worked with them in the classroom or in the community and can speak to their readiness to start university at this time. We have students applying from high school, from college. We have mature students. So really a variety of students come into our program. We admit up to 300 students a year across the two programs. Finally, one of the ways that we try and reach out and bring in students who might not traditionally be accessing post-secondary education in the same numbers is we have links with a number of community organizations. So I sit on the Ottawa Pathways to Education Program Advisory Board. We have connections to the Pinecrest Queens Bay Community Health Center, the Boys and Girls Clubs. We send our student ambassadors to various community organizations and high schools. And when I turn it over to Natalie in a moment, she's one of our former students. She worked in that capacity as one of our high school ambassadors. And finally, our Aboriginal High School Mentorship Program sends upper year university students here at Carleton into the local high schools and one of the elementary schools that have a high proportion of Aboriginal students to offer mentoring in those settings and to encourage people to consider post-secondary education as a possibility. So with that, I'll turn it over to Natalie, who was one of the students in our program and a recent graduate of Carleton.
Hi there. My name is Natalie Lowry, and I just graduated from Carleton University from the criminology program in June. But today I'm here to talk to you about kind of my personal story, because I did come in through ESP. So I think it's important for me to take you back to where it started and the background that I came from. I actually grew up in a very Christian family, tight-knit, did a lot of traveling when we were younger, and I knew nothing but my family. So when I was about 13 years old and my parents divorced, my whole world crashed and burned, and everything really fell apart for me. So within, I'd say, a year or two, I just fell off the rails. And I went into high school switching houses all the time. I went to 4 different high schools by the time I was in grade 10. I could not maintain proper friends, let alone pro-social ones. My grades were falling. I couldn't get onto a sports team. I started abusing substances, and it was everything you can imagine going wrong just happened at once. So I dropped out by grade 10, and I moved out of home out of embarrassment of my actions. And a couple months went by. I hadn't had any contact with my family, and my mom got in touch with me and met up with me and said, you know, if you ever want your life back, you ever want your education back, you ever want to come home, you have to go to this boarding school. And my walls came down. I couldn't really lose anything else at that point, so I got shipped 5 hours north, and I went to a boarding school where I spent about 7 to 9 months focusing on individual therapy, family counseling, self-reflection, and a little bit of education. So I did work on some courses, but the core focus there was not my education. It was on recovering me as a person. So when I came out, I went back to my hometown and started trying to put the pieces back together. But there were so many complications. I was suspended within a week of going back to high school. I was involved with wrong friends. Substances were everywhere. And I was just overwhelmed. So I said, you know, Mom, like, I have to get a grip on my education. This is the one thing that's going to get me back on track. Can't do it at high school. So I left, and I said, what are my options for my education right now? And the only thing available to me was a night school where it was open once a week for 2 hours a week. So I had all of these course books for every single credit for all of grade 11 and 12 that I had to do by myself while trying to get jobs back and trying to build relationships with my family. And I had to work on it all by myself, and I didn't have a lot of support at all. So it took me longer than expected. And then when I finally got to graduate, you know, we started talking about, like, what are my options? And the people at this night school kind of said, you know, your options aren't that many because this isn't a recognized high school, and you've still got 50s and 60s on your transcript, and we've given you these things called equivalents for your life experience at jobs. So you're not going to be accepted to many universities, if any. And I said, okay, well, that's still my goal, and I want that. So my mom and I went elsewhere. She was my support. And she found ESP, and she got in touch with them. We drove up to Ottawa within a couple days and met with one of the advisors, Al, who still works here, and just got some advice on my application. So what really made the difference in my acceptance was being able to write that personal statement. I got to tell them all the nitty-gritty details of my life and how messed up it was, but where I wanted to go and why I knew I was going to try and really fight for this. And I think they accepted me off that because my transcript did not have many shiny things on it at the time. So once I got in my first year, I would say there were 4 main things that I got support with. The first and most influential for me were the workshops, which Susan did talk about. They're built into your schedule. It's like a 3-hour study session that you don't have to think about. Attendance matters, and there is a bit of financial support. If you go to 80% of your workshops and you maintain an A- overall average by the end of the year, you're going to be given $500 off of your tuition the next year, which was incredible to me. I was going to be on financial aid my entire time, so that alone was motivation. But I really got to learn how I learn best again. Was it in group work? Was it talking out loud? Was it writing things down, memorizing, analytical thinking? We did it all. And the second support was coaching. So this was also spoken about. It's basically one-on-one tutoring. I just went into the ESP website. I chose the coach that I wanted to meet with and what I wanted to do, and I was in the next day. And they were really supportive, but they were also really challenging. So things that were going on in my head that I might not have wanted to get down on paper, they challenged me to put them down no matter how messy they were so that we could work on them together. Because the whole idea is you're not alone. You're not doing it alone. The third is advising. And Susan Burhoe was actually one of my academic advisors in my first year 5 years ago. And she really got to know me as a person. So when second term came and they said, you know, your grades are good enough, you can pick up another course. She said, well, you know, this is the degree that you wanted to go into. This is the course that's going to be beneficial for you, which I wouldn't have chosen, right? They're there to guide you. And then when it came time for me to apply into my degree, she said, this is what the application is going to look like. Here's where you're going to find it. Here's the things you need to do ahead of time. Here's some things you're missing. So it really, they just make everything seem so accessible. And then the fourth support is your first year seminar. So Beth Hughes, who also still works in the program, very approachable professor. And then you have a peer mentor in there. And this is a second year student who's been through ESP. And they're in that classroom every single time, breaking down that barrier between the student and professor relationship. They make it really easy to talk to them, really easy to access. They suggest services that you want, whether it's for a learning disability or career support. If you're stressing about exams, they'll just throw an extra study session to help all of you guys out. So they really made you feel comfortable. So when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today and how that door that ESP opened up for me was really a pathway. It wasn't just a pathway to education. It was other doors it opened. It led to other opportunities. And one of those big opportunities for me was field placement. So ESP really helped me develop the academic skills I needed to be able to maintain the grades that I needed to get into field placement in criminology in third year. Acceptance was based off the top 80 grades in the department, so I wouldn't have gotten in if I had not put in that effort and learned those skills. So through field placement, I was given 2 placements. I was given a research assistant position with the Church Council on Justice and Corrections, where I polished administrative skills, and I got to research a lot of restorative justice. And then I was given a placement with UCAN. So it's a youth-led organization where people like myself go into high schools and communities, and it's a preventative way to teach youth conflict resolution skills. So the big training we did was cross-cultural conflict resolution. And it was like a hands-on application of all of the knowledge that I had learned throughout university. And those experiences really helped me build my resume. So the second pathway it opened was employment, right? Those field placements were non-paid. Just within ESP alone, I was a mentor in second year. I was a facilitator for those workshops in my last year. I've been an administrative clerk over the past year, and I was a school ambassador. So I got to go right into schools directly and sit with students one-on-one and share my story so they didn't feel bad about the position they were in, so they weren't embarrassed with their grades, and I got to spread the information about this program to them. And I think a big barrier is getting this out there. Nobody at that night school told me about ESP, right? It was my mom who had to find it. So I think that the ambassador program is really crucial in getting that information out. And then the third one is my career. I did have some employment opportunities for ESP, and while I'd like to hang around the program as long as I could, I am pursuing law enforcement. So I'm in the middle of my background investigation for RCMP right now, and I'm also obtaining the certificate I need for the OPP and municipal police. And in doing so, I've learned how to prepare for exams from university and from the opportunity that ESP provided me. I've learned how to perform under pressure. I've learned how to be vulnerable. Ask questions, communicate when you're having trouble, and really to have good time management. So it's through the ESP supports, the structure of the program, the supervision of it, that I've really gained the confidence I needed to tackle my education and take all the skills that I could out of it. So I've gotten my education back, and ESP provided me that access that changed my life essentially. So my advice moving forward to anybody, we all come from different backgrounds, anybody who has different barriers, is that no matter what stage of your education you're at, it's a bit of a puzzle and a maze all at the same time. And you're not going to be given all of the combinations to get through it or get to the end of it all at once. You have to take it one thing at a time. Work on one requirement. So if you apply to a program like ESP and they say you're 4% away from getting that 60% minimum for your math credit, don't be discouraged. Take that summer that you need to redo it. Take the year of high school that you need to redo it and come back. The program isn't going anywhere. The supports aren't going anywhere. Everybody that works in these kind of programs is rooting for you and can't wait for people to come. They want to support you. So push yourself. And don't be afraid to make mistakes along your journey, because I made plenty of them.
Wow, thank you so much, Natalie. That was phenomenal and kind of pulled everything together and grounded a lot of our bigger concepts and real life experience. So I think there's tremendous value in hearing from you. So at this point, I'm going to bring back the other presenters, and I am going to share a couple of questions that come in, and I'm going to, we're almost at, well, we are at the hour now, but we'll stay for a little bit longer, and I'd like to invite any of the participants to ask any questions that come to their mind as they were listening. One thing that I'm just really struck by is in Natalie's description of the bridging program supports is how similar they are to of thinking about bridging programs as youth programs, and thinking about the different supports that they offer and how those can be translated into different contexts. The concept of wraparound support, these multiple dimensions of support that young people can access. Anyway, that's the one piece that I'm thinking about. But when a question has come in, I'll ask it to Susan, or maybe I'll ask it to Natalie. Natalie, I'll ask you first. The question is quite technical, and the person is wondering, does taking the ESP add a year to your overall time that you're in university, and then how does that affect OSAP? Because OSAP is only available for 8 terms.
That's a great question, and it was a constant concern for people when we went into the ambassador program. And my answer to that is that depends how long you want your education career, I say, to take. I have watched people do it in 4 years coming into the ESP program. So the way that would work, you have 3 credits in the first term, and as you heard, if you keep your grades up, you can pick one up in the second term. So that puts you at 3.5 for that year. If you're wanting to do 5 a year, yes, you are 1.5 behind if you are trying to get out in 4 years. There is summer school options, so that would mean only you could take a 0.5 every single summer for 3 years, which wouldn't feel like anything, and you'd be on track by your 4th year. Then there's people who just do an entire credit in that first summer, so they're only 0.5 behind. And then the following summer, they take another 0.5. There are some people, I had students this year that I facilitated that did 1.5, and they're going into their 2nd year right now. So no, it does not set you behind. It depends when you'd like to get out. I chose to do mine over 5 years because to me, my grades were super important, and I think I'd been out of my education so long, I didn't really want to race through it.
Yeah, and it is possible for students to get caught up, so to speak, in that following summer and take, start in 2nd year without problem. It just depends on whether or not they want to go through that summer or if they want to take the summer to work. So, yeah, it's possible to get it done in 4 years, even if you start in our program.
Thanks. I also really like the idea that was touched on in everyone's presentation about flexible pathways, that there are pressures to rush through it to make, probably for that financial reason, but also that you can stop but not lose ground. So programs that are designed to allow you to come back when you're ready, that as a function of these programs seems very valuable. A person, Jackie, you might know the answer to this. One person is talking about how useful the design of the ASP model would be for, this is a huge issue in young people who need support accessing PSC, crown wards, people who are transitioning out of care. And so this person is saying that not all of the youth are located near Ottawa, and they're wondering if there are other programs that are available at other Ontario universities that offer a similar kind of comprehensive wraparound support.
Are you talking about comprehensive specifically for Crown Ward?
I'm thinking about the examples that you gave, and then also the resources that you directed people to in.
Yeah, so definitely, I would refer to those resources for sure. So in the report, in the appendices, there's a list of more programs. Some of the programs are specific to people in or leaving government care, whether they're financial or informational. But you spoke about more wraparound programs, so I would suggest looking at the Post-Secondary as Possible website as well that we shared in the presentation. But yeah, so I think those are definitely important areas to go, and I think Toronto's program is probably pretty, I don't want to, because they're so different in different contexts, like I mentioned, so I wouldn't say one would be exactly like Carleton's, but there are definitely some that mirror that in universities.
Susan, do you have anything to add?
Just that The transition year programs offered, at U of T, and York has one. Ryerson does too with their bridges to Ryerson, and they have a variety of pathways programs actually. They're primarily designed for students who've had a break from studies, and I think one of the things that is maybe a little more unique about ours is just that we also accept students coming straight from high school. So not just students who've had at least 1 year away from studies. Some of them have an age requirement where you have to be 21 coming in. We don't have those requirements. Lakehead has a program for Aboriginal students, sort of a bridging type program for Aboriginal students coming in. I also used to serve on the Ottawa Crown Ward Education Championship team, and there are a number of championship teams across Ontario that got funding to look at transition or encourage students to consider post-secondary options and look at what kinds of supports were out there for Crown Ward youth leaving care and coming into post-secondary. So, even connecting with some of those committees, some of them put materials up online or created for their workers, transition guides for workers working with youth considering going into post-secondary.
Well, thank you, everyone. We don't have any more questions, and we are over time. So I'd just like to thank you all for what you've offered us to think about today. It's clear that bridging programs are a piece of the puzzle for supporting people to access and complete post-secondary education. So thank you so much for all the different perspectives that you brought to this important conversation. I really appreciate it. And I'll just sign off by, again, encouraging anyone who's interested to read the report that we've just released, to check out Carleton's website, contact Carleton if you're specifically interested in that program, and check out the resources that Jackie mentioned through the CET, which has an inventory of different options. And I just want to make one final plug before signing off, again, for upcoming YouthREX Provincial Knowledge to Action Exchange, which is happening at the end of October. So on that note, I'll say thank you again, and see you all next time.